want to spend some time about kinking and what causes it and what to look for, because unfortunately, that is why after my first snake I waited so long to get another snake, and that is why right now, despite having snakes on and off for 10 years, that's why right now all my snakes are babies and new. It's because of this, because of the heartache that went with this, because of the insecurity that went with this. And it was my first snake, and that's, what happened. So when he was first born, he was a corn snake, and he was actually kind of this color, one of those pink morphs, but it was a snow. I forget what that pink is called, but that gene, I'm told, actually is more prone to kinking than other genes, for whatever reason. Now, this is a very hard to see picture, but there's a little bump dorsally, right there where the arrow is. On my snake, I wish I would have kept the pictures and the x-rays, because it'd be a lot easier than trying to do it this way. But I just, it was painful to look at after what happened. And so eventually after a few years, I let those go. But anyway, my snake, he had it, Luke had it starting right there about, instead of where that arrow is. And that's the only thing I saw. And so right there, is where it goes into the tail. The body kind of goes into the tail. And I thought, I was told that males, their tails will usually more rapidly narrow than female tails will, and females will have a longer tail, or a tail that takes longer to narrow down. So I thought, well, that's right, at that base of the tail. Maybe it's just because he's a male. That's how ill-informed I was. So he started out looking like that, and then he started looking a little more like this. A couple years passed and he looked like that. After I saw the second bump, I went to the vet. It was tiny, but and most people wouldn't have thought anything. But I was just like, this wasn't there before, and it's not normal. And my first thought was like cancer. So I took him to the vet. I did. And the vet said, well, it's most probably not cancer, but it's either a bacterial infection, which sometimes makes these kinks, or on the more rare side, it could be genetic. So she treated for the bacteria. She also did some testing. She did some x-rays and things. But initially, I think it was just testing and treating for the bacteria. And when that did not work, and when he came back negative for, whatever that kind of bacteria was, we knew that it was genetic and that there was nothing we could do to stop it. You could see when she was discussing it with me, you could see just sheer anger at the breeder for allowing this snake to be sold and not be culled, because the humanest thing to do would have been to cull it so that it did not suffer. She told me that this condition eventually, not right away, but eventually, when it starts looking like that, when it's that bad, it will start to cause pain, and eventually it will get so bad that they become paralyzed and they will die. So I asked her, well, is he in pain right now? She said no. And she said it would be a slow progression. She said you can either humanely euthanize him now, or you can have who knows how much time before, he ultimately would succumb to this and have to you probably euthanize him later. So it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And I'm not good with making the decision to end something's life, especially something so innocent and sweet and kind, something that had never shown any aggression, never done anything bad, and I couldn't do it. Not when he was not in pain. If he was in pain, that would be different. I would not hesitate. So, several years passed, 2 or 3 years passed, and last few months of his life, we tried, because he was still getting around okay. He was still eating, he was still drinking. He didn't seem to be that bothered. He just seemed to be a little stiff in his neck. So we tried some subcutaneous pain injections, which she, taught me how to do so it wouldn't harm him. And he was so chill that he took it fine. And he seemed fine. And I asked her opinion. I said, is he in pain? And she said, he doesn't seem like he's in pain to me. So we waited. As she said, when he stops wanting to eat or drink, then he's probably in pain. So last week of his life, I went to feed him and he didn't want to eat, but he was still drinking. And he was a little more stiff in his neck. And then just overnight, without warning, I went in to pick him up and he was limp the next morning. And I thought, well, did he, slither around too fast and, make fracture one of those kinks or something? Or was it pressing up against something? Or did he just, finally get to just the right spot in his body that it made him paralyzed? So I was looking at him, and I realized that his heart was still beating, and that he was trying to move a little bit. So I sat there with him. I knew he was dying. I sat there with him for a good 3 to 5 hours. I don't even know how long it was. I just sat there, and he passed away in my lap. He wasn't just any snake. He actually was an advocate, an ambassador for children that had physical disabilities, and even some children that had mental disabilities could relate to him. And he was so tame that, the kids could pet him. And, he was like a dog, he was. So, to me. So, it was really sad. I was glad he didn't seem to suffer. He just seemed to, here one day, gone the next, and maybe a little stiff, but I had reassurance from the vet that he wasn't in a lot of pain. He wasn't in so much pain that, he didn't have quality of life. I trusted, her opinion on that. And if I didn't have that opinion, I would probably put him down the last time I took him to her. So I buried him and, just couldn't bear the thought of getting another snake because it was so sad. But then someone came to me with this sand boa and was like, I have a sand boa, I don't want it. And I said, why? She seems, nice to me, like a nice snake. And, I wasn't really holding her, I was just looking at her. And I just kind of trusted that they got lazy. And so, I took her home, and they said, oh, by the way, she only eats live. And I did everything that you're supposed to do. Feed him in a separate container. Don't, touch the mouse and then pick up the snake, because you have the mouse smell on your hands. Pick up the snake, put it in the container, and then put the mouse in. So I've been doing that the whole time. To discourage, them looking at something moving and striking at it, mistaking it for prey. But she would mistake my fingers for prey, and I couldn't hold her. And I just thought, well, maybe I can retrain her, but I never could. So she ended up going to a breeder because, number one, I did not like feeding snakes live for several reasons, and she would starve because that's all she wanted. And she would rather starve than eat something frozen. So I said, hey, I've got this really cool, black and white sand boa. Do you want it? And they're like, oh, hell yeah. So I sent her to them, and happily ever after. But then I got even more discouraged because I was like, well, I guess not all snakes were like Luke, Not all of them were that chill. You know, which I knew already, but I thought, even with bad habits, that I could train them to, get back to something a little more tame. That's sort of what you do when they're hatchlings. You desensitize them and get them used to people. I mean, how much different would it be really to, you know, train a Sambo and not to bite you? Well, that didn't work out. Those habits were just too firmly instilled in her through many years, so I couldn't blame her. So finally, I had this friend that had a red-tailed boa, and seeing her snake made me want a snake again, because it was nice. It acted like Luke. It was like, I would say, most snakes, if you get them young, it was tameable. And she had got it young, like I had gotten Luke young. I didn't want to go the pet store route again, because that's where I got this deformed snake, was at a pet store, that Petco actually. Those big ass pet stores, those really big pet stores, a lot of times, any pet store, but especially those that are not specialty, they're looking for the cheapest way, and they will purposefully buy culls that breeders sell to them at really cheap prices, and then they sell it to you for full price, and that's how they make their money. So I started, looking at breeders and different people who sell snakes, and I thought, well, the easiest way is online, but it's also, pretty risky. Still risky if you meet them in person. So, you never know. So I tried the online thing, and I had ball pythons on the brain, because they are like a smaller version of, as far as, kind of what they look like. I know they're a totally different species, but they're sort of like a little mini version of a red-tailed boa. So I thought, well, that is so cool, And this pet store didn't have this. Pet store didn't have any ball pythons, but they had, other snakes. I thought, well, wow, these online places have a ton of them. And then I saw these corn snakes, and I just had to look at the corn snakes, because the memory of my first snake, he was a corn snake, and I don't know. So then I ended up not being able to decide, and you can see why, because there's so many. But then I ended up with, okay, I'm going to get one corn snake for sure, and one ball python for sure. But I waited years, and then the pandemic came. I worked from home. I even changed my business more to farming than what I was doing before, which was like commission artwork stuff. I had more time. I got myself a little, store, or I had a space in a store anyway for my artwork, and I thought, well, between these two things and then working from home, I could just continue doing that. So then I, with more time, I started thinking about things, a lot of different things, and one of them were, of course, snakes. So for 2 years, I would just look and marvel at it. But, that's all I did for a long time. And so now that's why I've got all these baby snakes. And no adult snakes, even though I've had snakes forever, on and off. I finally broke down and just had to get a snake. But that will always stick with me. That image of just how sad it was with my first snake, and what he went through, and how I had to watch him slowly get paralyzed and die. So I figure, okay, now I'm doing all these snake videos. I need to tell this to people. I need to tell people, to make them aware, so that this doesn't happen to them. It doesn't always have to be obvious. It doesn't always have to start out obvious. It can start out very, very discreet. And that's the scary